Welcome to the One Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi, chapter 13 and 14, on this topic of the book of the Jew, or the book that comes from the mouth of a Jew. Make sure you watch my previous video on the Great and Abominable Church. First, let's discuss the word book for a bit. You know what a book is. I know what a book is. Would Nephi have known what a book is? Would Nephi have known what a computer was, or an airplane? Would he have used the word airplane or computer if he had seen one of those in the year 550 or whatever BC? No, he would not. And yet Nephi sees a book which wasn't even common for 1,000 years later. And he knows exactly what it is. So, yeah, that's one of the many anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. The next sort of preface thing to talk about is the official, non-official, LDS summary statement at the top of the chapter, at the chapter heading. I hadn't read it before, but it is important for one reason. And that is, it says that part of this chapter is on the loss of many plain and precious parts of the Bible. The reason this stood out to me is I've had at least one LDS Mormon try to get out of some of the implications of what is written in this section here in 1 Nephi by trying to say that we don't even know if the book of the Lamb of God, which had proceeded forth from the mouth of the Jew, was even talking about the Bible, either the Old Testament by itself or the Old Testament plus the New Testament. But if the LDS Church says that it is referring to the Bible, who is he to say that it isn't? The context of discussing this book is a vision that Nephi has in which he sees the people who come to the Americas as carrying a book with them, with the angel telling Nephi in verse 23, quote, "It proceedeth out of the mouth of a Jew," and, quote, "is a record of the Jews, which contains the covenants of the Lord, which he hath made unto the house of Israel. And it also containeth many of the prophecies of the holy prophets. And it is a record like unto the engravings which are upon the brass plates, save there are not so many. Nevertheless they contain the covenants of the Lord, which he hath made unto the house of Israel. Wherefore they are of great worth unto the Gentiles." Since the brass plates were elsewhere identified as having the books of Moses, Isaiah, all the prophecies of all the words of the Old Testament prophets, that sort of thing, this must be talking about at least the Old Testament, although it is here claimed to be corrupted or only fragmentary because it says it contains many of the prophecies of the holy prophets. And it's a record like the engravings that are on the plates of brass, but not so many. I'm assuming the not so many is not so many records. The angel goes on to say in verse 24, "When it proceeded forth from the mouth of a Jew, it contained the fullness of the gospel of the Lord, and the 12 apostles bear record," which means that this part must be talking at least about the New Testament. And it goes on in verses 25 and 26 to say, "These things go forth from the Jews in purity unto the Gentiles," and that they go into the Gentiles by the hand of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So I agree with the LDS Church in the chapter heading at the top of this chapter that this is talking about the Bible as a whole, for no other book could meet this description so far. And anyone who wants to claim that it must be something else has a very hard task ahead of him. Verse 26 then claims that the Great and Abominable Church is formed, and it's very important to note this chronology, that this happens after the scriptures have gone forth, quote, "in purity unto the Gentiles." And then this church takes away from the gospel of the Lamb many parts which are plain and most precious, and also many covenants of the Lord have they taken away. So just what exactly was taken away? There are two major schools of thought in Mormonism on this point. One is that parts of the scriptures were actually removed physically, so that they once existed as part of the scriptures that the Jews had, but were excised so that later copies are missing words, phrases, and even entire sections. The other school of thought is that what has become lost is not the actual text itself, but just the understanding of what is meant in the Bible. And some Mormons may believe that both has happened, that some parts of the Bible have been removed and we have lost the understanding of what the rest of the Bible means, or at least portions of the rest of the Bible. And the typical Mormon may believe one or both, or vacillate between the two positions, at first trying to defend the one, then trying to defend the other. It can be difficult for that. I don't think that they can consistently claim that it is either one or the other, but not both. And I don't think that they can consistently, that is, using the same arguments, argue for one or the other. I don't think they can hold both, and I don't think just one will work either. So I think this is another thing that would cause the Book of Mormon to be shown to be a fraud. Based on this section in the Book of Mormon itself, I would say that the first position seems to be what is in consideration. That is, that when it says many plain and precious things have been taken out of the book, that it is referring to physical removal with both the Old Testament and the New Testament under consideration. For one thing, verse 23 speaks of the Old Testament as having only some of the prophecies of the holy prophets and of missing some of the things that are upon the plates of brass that Nephi stole from Laban. So this sounds like things being physically lost. The second position is a bit easier to defend, second position being that nothing was actually lost, but that only the understanding is missing or corrupted. One example of that would be in what baptism is. A Mormon might say, what is missing from the Bible is that the word baptism may be immersion, maybe not. The Bible doesn't say. That's why people can have differing opinions. So there can be Catholics and Presbyterians and Methodists that sprinkle babies, whereas Baptists insist on believers' baptism by immersion only, and the Bible isn't sufficient to say for sure. Whereas the Book of Mormon identifies baptism as immersion, so you see it's better, it's fuller, it's more complete, and it is not missing any of the plain and precious truths. So the second position is a bit easier to defend because we have extant evidence, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other ancient manuscripts, of what the Old Testament looked like at the time of the apostles and in the first century and in the early second and third centuries, that sort of thing, especially as you get into New Testament text. There was no central authority overseeing the text of the New Testament, and we have manuscripts dating back to very early times in all different languages all over the Roman Empire. There was no control. If there were changes, we would know about it. There may be variants among the manuscripts, but scholars can usually tell what the original wording was, and even if they don't know with certainty which particular reading was original, we are sure that the original reading is in one of the variants that we have. If a Mormon tries to claim the actual text is missing from the Bible, you need to ask them how that is possible, considering that there is zero evidence for that. But even if there were some unusual variant that is the true original, none of the variants we know of in either the Old Testament or the New Testament allow for Mormonism or any unique LDS or Mormon belief. Further, the Book of Mormon does not teach most of the unique LDS or Mormon doctrines. So how is it exactly that the Book of Mormon is restoring any missing plain and precious truths? Notice also that 1 Nephi 13 says that the Old Testament and the New Testament, that is these things, in verse 25, go forth from the Jews in purity unto the Gentiles, and verse 26 says they go forth by the hand of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Putting it together, this must mean that the apostles delivered to the Gentile Christians the Jewish and Christian scriptures in purity, and they were only corrupted afterwards, after the formation of the great and abominable church. So, whatever the scriptures were in the days of the apostles, those must be the pure scriptures, according to Mormonism. And we know what the scriptures looked like in the first century and before, and they didn't teach Mormonism.